Berlin, 1941. The Second World War intensifies on the new Eastern Front, and the radios indicate that the German army is advancing at a steady pace. It is only a few months before Operation Barbarossa fails and the Russians begin to twist the fate of the front. Much of Europe is in a critical situation, but on the German streets, life goes on and faces challenges that are very different from those of soldiers. In the next few minutes, we're going to show you what life was like for a German civilian under the Nazi regime. But before we continue, we welcome you to this new episode of Military History, a channel where you'll find the most compelling stories and facts about the different moments of the military past. And now, prepare to travel back in time. When we hear about the National Socialist regime and Adolf Hitler, we immediately think of World War II, but not so much of what the average German citizen was going through during that time. Either because history is written by the victors, or because the gaze on the Germany of that time does not discriminate between civilians and military, the truth is that the daily life of an inhabitant of Berlin, Munich, or Frankfurt in the period from 1933 to 1945 has not really been present in the popular imaginary. For this reason, it is time for us to ask, what was that life like, and what aspects stood out in the day-to-day life of a totalitarian regime? First of all, it is essential to understand the concept of totalitarianism. It is a form of government that restricts the freedom of its inhabitants to a minimum, since it intervenes in each and every one of the features of socio-political life. But we must mention some clarifying points. The first one is related to ancient Greece and Rome. Hitler yearned to achieve a Roman kind of order and traditionalism, while aiming to form what he considered to be beautiful bodies in a society that was purified of anyone who didn't match the desired parameters. This was the reason for the massacre of the disabled, invalids, children, Jews, homosexuals, blacks, and gypsies, as well as the use of mass sterilization following the philosophy of eugenics. This also explains the training of the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls, who were preparing to prolong their race as future soldiers and mothers, respectively. And when we speak of race, we refer to the Aryan race that Hitler considered objectively superior to the rest of the ethnic groups. The Chancellor based his belief on the ideas of 19th century ethnologists, who indicated that white Europeans descended from the same people, the Aryans, something that is still in dispute today, and that in fact was not based on any class of physical or intellectual trait, but in the existence of Indo-European languages. Meanwhile, the Reich never failed to hide its intentions to indoctrinate society, whose sentiment was one of resignation and support rather than genuine enthusiasm. After all, they had already been through a great war and paid its consequences. However, it was true that the economic and labor situation had improved thanks to the great impulse of public works, the manufacture of the Volkswagen, and, more than anything, the progressive recovery that reactivated the factories. The worker could obtain benefits from the German labor front, such as free theater tickets, vacations, and other rewards. Although, in contrast, 20% of the smaller businesses closed due to the new regulations, and workers extended their hours with a fixed salary and an increase in the number of accidents. Also noteworthy is the forced entry into the Reich labor service since 1935 for the unemployed and inexperienced. People continued to go to school or shopping, and even received monetary awards for marrying and having children for the Aryan race. And at the same time, they accepted that kind of daily darkness present in the new school curricula, the radio propaganda, the rationing of food and clothing that worsened from 1939 onward, the compulsory entry into the Wehrmacht, the sending of families considered undesirable to ghettos in occupied territories, and the absolute control of the judicial system by the government. The latter was what made any kind of opposition especially impossible, as the number of crimes that received the death penalty increased from 3 to 46 by 1939. Still, people needed to get on with their lives, despite dairies that disguised food shortages with ornamental bottles, husbands going to the front lines, and wives and boys working in factories or escaping to the fields and abroad. And nothing better than the word of someone who lived it firsthand to bring us closer to the truth. Many people believed that all Germans were like Muslim extremists, but they weren't. The family, the school, and the church also had an influence on us, explained the German-American Friedrich Tubach to the History Net. He added, "Hitler never trusted the Germans. There was extensive surveillance, and people were executed just for making a bad joke about him." Also noteworthy are the statements of the renowned historian Richard J. Evans to the BBC's History Extra portal. Most of the people wanted a quiet life and retired to private life. Ironically, they appreciated the restoration of the economy, law, and order, but they did not like the education system and other aspects that were unpopular. It was a complex panorama. In this particular normality, Hitler sought representations of Aryan power in art and sport. An example of this was the Olympic Games of 1936. It is worth noting here the work of the filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, who, with her film Olympia, compared the skill of national athletes with the semi-divine virtues of the ancient Greek Olympic Games. Along the same lines, and under the guidance of the Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, a decalogue was presented with the purpose of controlling from the tempo to the ways in which musical groups had to play an instrument. And what about the women? Their financially encouraged fate were their children, their houses, the church, and the traditional dress codes. However, more than 2 million women became workers between 1933 and 1939 due to the growth of the economy. Finally, it is hard not to wonder how much the Germans knew about the atrocities committed by their government. One possible answer is, again, that of Richard Evans, who claims that, at least around 1942, the concentration camps were well known. But it is worth listening once more to Friedrich Tubach. Nobody even dared to ask, for fear of discovering what had happened to the Jews. Later, with the Allied bombardment and the outbreak of war, it no longer mattered. But if the truth had come to light, it would have been fatal. It could be argued that life under the Third Reich had components as shocking as those on the battlefield. It is also important to note that life always makes its way under any circumstance, and the daily life of the Germans during Nazism was no exception. But now, we want to know your answer to this question. What surprised you the most about the daily lives of citizens under the Nazi regime? Leave us your comment below. We also invite you to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next video.